So this is one of videos that I'll do on it. So I'll just put this bacon down. Oh, that's where I left that. Yeah, my firearms. I must have left it inside the 4.3 diesel Ford F450 that I drive. Alright, so let's get started. So before we get too far into the talk about the air, because this is about air, let's talk about go a little update on consolidation. So you can see here's this article here from Real Agriculture. High Life has recently bought Provista. Life has announced the purchase of one of Canada's largest independent hog operations, 152 employees. So even more consolidation in the industry. We knew that they were probably 75-80% of the industry, and how big are they now? No one even knows. I don't think anyone cares. They were wonderful animals because you could just let them go and they would go and feed themselves, and then you could easily gang them together and herd them to market. Manure would be mixed with straw and then composted. But in the concrete slatted floor industrial system, it settles in a lagoon, and it encourages anaerobic respiration among the microorganisms. This releases toxic gases which are poisonous to animals and people. Talk about odor, there's different levels. You see, like if you're the guy working in the barn, you're talking in parts per million. And you use a sensor, like one of these H2S sensors, and they'll measure what you need to know between what could become dangerous and what is just, because you can't really smell it. Your human ability to smell gets overwhelmed very quickly in a barn like that, and you can't even really realistic smell it. The neighbor can smell it more than you can, the guy working inside the barn. It smells like rotten eggs. And the 2 to 3, the odor is strong. So that's probably the measurement that I'm getting in. But that's 2 to 3 in parts per billion. Parts per billion, you see? See, at 100 to 200, the sense of smell is blocked. This is what you'd need, instead of it being like $100 unit, this thing is like $5,000, maybe more, and this unit is what you need to get the smell that the neighbor is smelling. So it's not something that the neighbor can afford to purchase, or even the farmer. It's got to be something that's provided by the association or the government and used temporarily. It's a gold film analyzer. So the gold film analyzer, some of the specs on it, pretty sophisticated piece of equipment. So we talk about, is this hydrogen sulfide all that dangerous? Well, in 2015, father and son were both killed by noxious fumes, and the dad went down to try to rescue the son, and he died. There was another death in the same year, 2015. Another father and son died in the pit, just the same year, a month before. And then prior to that, in 2017, 4 Virginia family members died in a pit because of gases. So today I sent a letter to my RM asking if they would help me have a shelter belt to reduce the odor. So I want to show you a little bit about why I did that.
Last line of defense. So the goals of vegetative environmental buffers: 1 is for visual screening, 2 is to have this vegetative filter where the trees are actually doing something to either disperse odors or to help filter odors out of the air streams. They also like sort of windbreak effects. Generally speaking, they bit about what odor is. Odor is a really interesting thing. It's an incredibly complex mixing of upwards of over 400 chemicals that combine to create that very familiar manure smell. And it's this last point, this note about particulates and odor. This is really key. Research has shown that the majority of odor that moves downwind and ends up being problematic are these volatile organic compounds that are moving by way of particulate. And research has shown that to the degree that you can control particulate movement, you're also controlling the movement of odor. This is a simulated single row of trees. When an airstream reaches a row of trees, it does one of 3 things. Some of it goes around the outside, some of it goes through, some of it gets pushed above. Where we think the big benefit is here to the lee. And so what happens when air comes across, the airstream compresses, it picks up speed, and it creates this zone of turbulence. It's called wind shear. As it comes past the tree, the airstreams start to expand again, and you get this turbulence. It allows for a much slower release of these odorous particulates back into the downwind airstream. In terms of physical interception of dust, somewhere around 90%.
So I actually bought the house in 2014, and the smell started coming 2 to 3 years later. And there's three of us neighbors within 300 meters of this barn. So it was a shut down old barn for a long time, and he had to remove all those trees, which I'll talk about later, that were around the berm. And that would have been the time I would have thought, if you're a good neighbor, now's the time to maybe shut it down. He's dug in his heels and he's done improvements on it, and he's there to stay. I can see the point of the Farm Practices Act and avoiding nuisance lawsuits with regular farmers, especially sustainable farmers, totally. But these are not sustainable farm operations, and they're passive income. I think it's very low labor. That's why the whole thing is so profitable for the hog industry. Nobody works there. No one's ever there, So I know what a lot of you guys are thinking. Why don't I just go and talk to the guy? Well, I filed a formal complaint, and according to the regulations, it's his responsibility to talk to me. Either way, I know what he's going to say when I go talk to him. If he's not forced to do anything, he isn't going to do it. But the reason I really didn't go and complain any further, aside from putting in the formal letter over 2 years ago, is that I'm in the middle of building my house. I needed local guys. Some of them, at least half of them, own these hog operations themselves. I needed their help with some timber frame work I was doing, some concrete work, excavation work, electrical work. Do I really want to go around and make enemies with all these people that I'm trying to build my shop and my house with? And then for the good neighbors that are not causing trouble for their neighbors, they're at risk if they support me, right? It's a complicated thing. It's a sensitive thing. But I'm out here now because I pretty well got everything built, and now I can afford to ruffle some feathers and maybe get some action. Hey guys, we're here by the river. So I've got my measuring tape and I've excavated the ground. You can see that it's cultivated right up to about here. And that's 3 meters. It's cultivated right up to about here. And there's the hog barn over there. The other thing I want to point out too is that my land is right here. You can see my shop through the trees. Okay. This whole area, according to the regulations, should be a shelter belt. And he's farming not only where there should be a shelter belt, but he's also farming right up to the river, less than 3 meters from the water. There's my other neighbor, but he's a good 600 meters away. And I can almost never smell that barn, no matter what's going on. Whereas my neighbor here is just under 200 meters away. The way I measure it, I could really smell that. The reservoirs don't really create too much smell. It's the fans coming off the barn. So why the regulations allow the barn to be closer than the manure reservoir, it should be the opposite. And the barn is closer to me at the minimum distance. When I'm kayaking down here along the river and I get to where the hog barns are, you just have to paddle quicker because it's so smelly. It's a beautiful river, but when you're kayaking along it, you sure know where all the hog barns are. Farmers are pretty sensitive about the potential for disease in these close confinement animal feed operations. I don't get any smell over here from the reservoir. Not only is it further away, but it doesn't really kick up odor.
They spread the manure as heavily as they can right before it rains, because sometimes that's the only dry spell that they had, that they can run the equipment on the land. I think there's a huge incentive to get rid of the manure, and obviously the closer to the plant that you can get rid of the manure, the more money you've saved, because it costs money to transport the manure far away. So the incentives are set up to encourage the farmers to do all the wrong practices. It says in the regulations that the farmer is supposed to communicate, especially if the neighbor has a problem, they're supposed to communicate with the neighbor. Farm Practices Board, of course, won't mediate, they won't get in between. And I think you need a mediator in this situation.
So that's it for this video. We'll talk about maybe soil on the next one, and I look forward to showing you what reaction I got from the RM on my request for a shelter belt. Also, I'm looking forward to meeting with my other neighbor, which has, it looks like, I think they have a sustainable operation. I know that, like I said, they have hogs running around in the outside. So I'd like to hear what their perspective is. And I'd like to see, can I buy meat from them? Can I buy that cute hog that was running around outside? I want to see that. And can I buy their grass-fed cattle meat? Boy, that would be good.